So, hi, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm lucky enough to have a guest with me today. Her name is Trish Herron. She's an adult chair certified life coach, focusing on supporting women through life transitions. And with an intuitive approach to listening, she fosters genuine connections that inspire growth and empowerment. Her focus is on creating spaces where clients feel seen, heard, and uplifted as they navigate change, empowering them to move forward with self love. And Trish also happens to be the host of her own podcast, the Human Show podcast. And I'm thrilled to have her on as a guest on my podcast today. So, welcome, Trish, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Debbie. This is great. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to talk to you about this because I know you work in transitions, and part of my work obviously is transitions with women going through midlife and menopause. So, definitely transition there. But can you tell me a little bit about your own journey and how you started doing this work?
Yeah, sure. What, how it started for me was my own struggle with anxiety, or what I thought was anxiety, and I was prescribed anxiety medication by my doctor. Took it for 3 years. Basically, it made me numb, and I figured that out. And you know, long story short, coming off of the medication was a period in my life which I would probably call my rock bottom. And pulling myself out of that, I was determined to do it without any more medication. So I started reading and listening and just absorbing any information I could about the self and how I could learn to process my emotions and deal with my stuff on my own without any medication. And what I learned in the process was, I didn't really have anxiety at all. I was just being triggered. And I didn't even understand what a trigger was until I started learning all this. And then it just expanded. And after spending a couple years doing my own work, and I got to a place like I really changed my life by doing this work. And I got to a point where I thought, I want to help other people do this. If I can do this, anyone can do it. So maybe I can help people on their journey with anxiety or whatever it is that's got them stuck.
Mm.
And so that led me to a coaching certification to become a life coach. And then after that, I started my podcast because it just seemed like a way to reach more people and just share more information and things that I've learned along the way. So that's how I ended up here.
Okay. Well, I love that story. I think it's a story of many people who get put on anti-anxiety meds. Unfortunately, I do think that happens probably too often. I know happens to a lot of women in midlife with the symptoms that show up in midlife sometimes are confused with the symptoms of anxiety and depression. And so it's yeah, I don't think it's unusual, unfortunately, what you've been through. But I appreciate really that you took the opportunity to discover yourself through all of that and to help yourself heal because you realize that the medication wasn't working for you. And I'm not going to say that, medication can be great, it can work for people, but and sometimes it's not prescribed for the right reason. And in your case, it sounds like that was the case. So you were able to heal yourself and now you're able to help others. So why did you choose to help people in transition? Is there a particular transition that you were going through that is something that you felt like I need to help people with that? Or is it, I just want to know the story behind that, I
It's
guess.
you know what, it's fairly recent, and it really came up because I worked with a few clients who were going through divorce, and for some reason that work that we did just really resonated for me. And I realized how heavy something like this can be for a woman to move through, and how valuable my support was for them. And that's what really it kind of lit me up. And I thought, okay, I want to help more women that are going through this and maybe don't have the support, or maybe don't have the right support, or, and they feel lost and they feel alone and they feel like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. Because for a lot of women, that's how it can feel. So I just really felt drawn to that and to helping women through divorce. And um, as I started following that path, I was talking to a friend about divorce, and she said, there are women going through other transitions that need the same kind of support. And then it sort of clicked for me, like, oh yeah, like divorce isn't the only challenging transition. And when I really started to break it down, I saw that all of these transitions, whether it's career or family or aging or divorce, whatever it is, they all have the same underlying themes. They're all the same underlying challenges. And for some situations, it might take longer to get through. It might feel more severe. Some might feel um, less severe, but it's the same stuff. It's the same emotions and shame and loss of identity and all of these kind of things that when you just look at transition, it's the same across the board. It just
Yeah.
depends on the woman who's experiencing it and how she's going to get through it. Everyone's case looks a little different.
Yeah. Yeah. I think by this time, like obviously my podcast is for women in midlife. So by this time, women have been through probably many transitions in their
Mm-hmm.
lives, right? You've mentioned a few like career change, divorce. These are things, having a family, huge transitions in their lives. So, what are, like, if you could think about it, like you said, there are some common themes that show up in all these transitions. So, what is similar for women going through transition, no matter what the transition?
Okay, so what I think some of the core ones are, first of all, grief. I
Mm,
think grief often gets overlooked. And the way I look at it, that's usually the first step that you need to move through is allowing the grief. Because, so many of us, we associate grief with death. And the fact is, grief is about loss, period. It can be a loss of a person, but it can be a loss of a job, a house, a friendship, a relationship, um, loss of your when your kids, you have adult children and they move out of the house, and whatever the transition is, there's a loss. And generally speaking, it's the loss of the way your life used to be.
yeah.
And when we can feel that first and accept that and just allow it, it's okay for us to be sad that we don't have that life anymore. It looks different. When you become a parent for the first time, that's a huge loss of how your life used to be. Now you're responsible for another human. I mean, so any transition you go through, the first thing is just recognizing that there's a loss and allowing yourself to feel sad about it, because that's okay. And so often we want to skip past all that and get to the end. We don't want to feel the yucky sadness.
Yeah, and to be honest,
Yeah.
like as you mentioned, sometimes you feel wrong in feeling sad. Like for example, having a baby, it is a loss of the single life that you had and the freedom that you had as a single
Mm-hmm.
person. And now you have this baby and you feel guilty for feeling any grief at all because you're like, but I should be happy. I have this new person in my life and it should bring more love into my life. But yes, there is a feeling of grief, but I don't think we're encouraged to feel that in that instant, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the problems is that probably since a lot of us, since we were young, we weren't really encouraged to feel our feelings because our parents probably weren't, and their parents probably weren't. And, this is just how it's gone for so many generations. Um, so we push it aside. No, we don't, we have things to do. We have to move on. You got to power through. Where a lot of us didn't learn at a young age to just let the sadness, let the grief, let the fear, let the anger, whatever it is, it's
Hmm.
okay. So I think that's a really, really important first step. And a lot of women, they need support with this because it's not something that comes naturally to them. So it's a practice to start
Yeah.
practicing, just letting the sadness come up, whatever the feeling is. It's a practice. And then the more you do it, the easier it gets. And then it doesn't seem so terrifying and weird.
Yeah, I can really appreciate that. I think as little girls, as and then we grow up into women, but we're not encouraged to feel these negative feelings. It's like, smile. Put a smile on your face. You look so much
Oh,
prettier
yeah.
when you smile, you know? My mother was always trying to put blush on my face to make me look like
Oh
I
my
guess,
gosh.
stuff like that, which it sounds bad, but I mean, that is what they learned and that is what they passed on to us is that, you smile. You're pretty when you smile.
Hmm.
So, yeah, we're not really encouraged to explore our deepest, maybe more scary, negative emotions, even though they're there and they're there for everyone. All of us feel them, even in moments where we think it's not appropriate, we can still feel it. And what I appreciate is that, you as a coach, you offer this safe space where it's bring the emotion, bring it. It doesn't matter the situation. What matters is you're feeling this emotion. So we need to allow it, right? So I think that's such a powerful thing. So grief is a big one. What are some other things that women bring to you in terms of a transition emotion?
So another one, and we kind of you kind of touched on it, when you said it, we feel guilty about things like there's a lot of shame that comes with transition. And um I mean, divorce especially, like
Mm,
a lot of women, they don't even want to talk about it. They don't even want to say they're in divorce. There's shame even around that word. When we are aging and our bodies are changing, we feel shame about that because, you know, physically women are supposed to look a certain way, um, and we get to a point where we physically can't anymore. We don't have a choice. Like aging is taking over. And so there's a lot of things. If we get laid off, maybe we feel shame in that. There's every transition, there's the potential to feel shame. And that can be a tough one to work through, but it's such an important one to work through because um, we have to understand that um, we everyone else's opinions are belong to them, and it's not taking things personally. The Which
mhm.
reminds me of the you've read the Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. So the
Yes,
one
yes.
agreement is don't take anything personally, and that's the one that like has stuck with me, and it comes up for me, and I remind people of that because when we feel shame, and shame means like we're bad. Guilt is we've done something bad. Shame is we are bad, and the reason
Mhm.
we feel the shame is because of the perceptions, opinions from the people in the world around us. So working through shame is being able to detach from that
Mm,
and to understand that what other people say and do is not about you. It's about them and their stuff. And that's a hard thing to work through. But when you do and you practice it, my gosh, it makes all the difference. It makes all the difference. So, and it's empowering.
yeah.
It's empowering when you can get to a point where other people's reactions, opinions, and everybody's got them when you're going through a transition. everyone's People want to tell you what to do, what not to do, um and it's so important and so empowering to be able to recognize that that's theirs, it's not yours. And
Yeah.
that's can be challenging, but such a big um such a big step in going through transition is being able to detach from the external influences. And that's a big part of
Yeah.
shame and overcoming shame.
I love that because yes, we have to not take things personally. I do love that book too, and that is the one that has stuck with me as well, is not to take things personally. And I don't even think it's even about what people say sometimes. It's about what we think they will say and what we
Mm,
think they will think about us because we're going through this. Like it's our own perception, our own brain that is telling us these things. And we don't know until we actually go out there what will happen. But sometimes the shame is just about what will they think. And I just remember that when I was going through my divorce because I was in a family surrounded by people who really hadn't gone through that before. So I was lucky enough to not, have had that in my past. But here I was going through it, and it was just I felt very like, what will they think? What will they say? It felt very shameful, very wrong. And what's wrong with me? And, I just remember that. So when you were talking about it, I was like, wow, yeah, that really resonated with me. And when I did talk about it, I was actually surprised that the response I got was more positive than what I thought it was going to be. And I had a lot of people come up to me and say, I'm struggling in my relationship, or I'm
mm,
thinking of going through this. And people all of a sudden wanted to talk to me about it. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting because I didn't even know it existed until I was going through it. So, yeah, sometimes shame will come up, and sometimes it's in our own brains, and sometimes, yes, it's the people around us who are also contributing to it for sure. But it's so important. It's such a human emotion. And obviously, I'm pretty sure you know the work of Brene Brown that,
absolutely.
all about shame and vulnerability and how important that is to the human experience. It's a normal human thing. And like you said, there's a difference between shame and guilt. And shame is saying that we are bad and there's something wrong with us.
Hmm.
And that's really deep. So if we can work through it with somebody like you, with a coach, I think that is such a valuable, valuable thing. So yeah, shame's a big one.
Yeah, you brought up a good point about our self perceptions, and a big component of shame can be just the voice of your inner critic. And
Mm.
it's another thing that I like to work on, is the inner critic, because what I always say is, everybody gets a seat at the table, meaning like your emotions, even your inner critic. When your inner critic comes up and says, like, why are you doing this? And a lot of the shame can come from that. So I help people to, instead of ignoring it, dismissing it, because that's what we want to do, is to
Mhm.
actually turn toward it and say, okay, you think I'm messing up? So let's figure it out and actually face it. And it's amazing how when you start to do that, things start to sort of soften and dissolve and break down. When you stop turning away and you turn toward, and you're like, okay, let's hear it. Give me what you got. And then
Yeah.
you just start to break it down as if your inner critic is the person that you're talking to, because really it's an inner part of you. And the more you talk to those inner parts, which may sound weird for someone who hasn't done it, but the more you talk to them, the more you can grow and evolve, because dismissing those and not giving them attention is what is keeping us stuck in these patterns.
Yes, you're all
So,
right.
anyway,
Yeah, avoidance is never a good thing,
yeah.
like you're saying. And it's usually like we've made this voice out to be this big, scary, hairy monster. And when we can face it, we realize, hey, it really doesn't have that much power over us. And the more we can look it in the eye and realize, hey, actually, it's not that scary at all, that I can actually face this. I think that's so important. And that's such a good way to look at it. I always, when I coach people and they have this inner critic or something inside them, this voice, I have them give it a name. Like give it a name of somebody that you don't like.
Yeah.
Just give it a name, and then you can refer to it that way because it is still part of you, but it's not all of you. And so it's just one of the voices. So give the voice a name and talk to it, like you said. And I find that helpful, giving it a
Yeah.
name.
I love that. I love that.
Good. So we have grief, we have shame. Are there any other emotions that you find show up with the transitions?
Yeah, so I don't know if you'd call this an emotion, but the um, loss of identity
Mm,
is one because when, for a while, where maybe it's the job or our personal life or whatever it is, it's a certain way and we have a certain image of who we are. And then that all changes. And what can come with that is, well, now who am I? And divorce is, it's an easy one to talk about with divorce because you were this person's partner for however long.
mhm,
And for a lot of women, they completely lose their own self, and they don't even know who they are because what they have become is just this person's partner. And they don't even realize it until they are no longer this person's partner. And now they're like, who the hell am I? And that's also ties into the grief and the shame because that can feel really sad and really lonely. Um, because you're like, well, if I was only this person's partner and now I'm not, now what do I do? Where do I go? Who am I?
mm. Who am
And that
I?
is really hard. So that is that's one of the big things to work through and work on is just acknowledging that. Okay, who was I? What's that picture that you had of yourself? And appreciate that and be grateful for that. And that was great. And now, who am I now? And who do I want to be? Like, you can create it. You can make it whatever you want. So now let's rebuild the identity that you want because it's your choice.
Oh yeah.
So, and that's also really empowering to say, this is your choice. Who do you want to be? And then start building that. So that's a big one. And that comes with it's not just divorce. Like we talked about any different stages of parenthood, where,
Yeah.
when you become
Anything.
a parent for a long time, now you're just this person's mom. That's it. Like that's your identity. And then
Yes.
you get to an age where now they're adults and they move out and they don't need you. Well, now who am I? So, you know,
Yeah.
and it's
And
okay. Your identity can change and that's okay.
and it will change. And I
Yeah.
think that's part of life, right? We identify ourselves and it seems like a rigid thing, but it's not. It's like we can change our identity when we choose to. It doesn't even have to happen to us. We can choose that. What I find interesting too, what came up for me when you were talking about that was I work a lot of women I work with are going through weight loss
Mhm.
and they have struggled a lot of times. They end up with me because they have struggled with this for decades, weight loss. And it's become part of their identity to deal with their weight. And it is like a grief. It is like like you said, there's shame. There's all these things that show up. And it just occurred to me that weight loss is a transition. When you've identified yourself as somebody who needs to lose weight or who is always losing weight, who is always on a weight loss journey, and then all of a sudden you don't have to be that person anymore, that is a huge shift in identity. And that is a struggle for a lot of the women I work with is to not identify as I I'm the woman who needs to lose weight and rather be the woman who doesn't think about her weight. Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
So
That's a really powerful one.
it is. And we don't think of that as a transition, but it very much is,
Hmm.
especially when you have identified yourself that way for such a long time.
Yeah, and maybe
Yeah,
without even
that's really
realizing it.
good.
It can be
Yeah,
a lot of
without
times it's
even
just,
realizing it.
yeah.
Yeah, you just think it's, well, that's a lot of times they think, maybe everybody's doing this, everybody's there, or you think that, it's impossible that I'll ever get there. But it's really just a shift in how do I identify myself and how do I want to see myself even before you lose the weight, going through this transition through your mind before you even make the change, I think is probably hugely beneficial as well, is to project like where do I want to be with this? After this transition is done, who is that person going to be? And like you said, that could be a tremendously creative and fun process if we allow it to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I really like that. And is there anything else? So these three things, is there anything else you would say about like the obstacles or emotions of
The
transition?
okay, well, so something else, it's not an emotion, but something that's super, super important, um, is boundaries. And I mean, boundaries are important no matter what, but when we're in a transition, especially in the beginning, when we can feel maybe a little fragile and we're trying to figure things out and we don't know where things are going, we need to set boundaries to protect that fragile self that we are just for that
Mhm.
time. It might mean you don't hang out with certain people for a little while. It might mean you don't engage in certain activities for a while. It might mean you take a break from social media. I mean, this is a big one. This is a big boundary, um, that I think more people could benefit from practicing, because so many of us, we we end up comparing. I mean, we compare ourselves. We have since we were kids, right? We compare ourselves to other women, and then you go on social media and it's like, here you go, here are all these women that are doing more than you and better than you, and they're not, but that's the perception, right?
Yes.
So that's a big one. So anyway, setting those boundaries when you're in that beginning stage and you're trying to figure things out, and you need to give yourself the space, you need to hold yourself in a safe space so that you can move on to the next step in your path.
Mhm.
And that's a really big one because, um, like I said before, people, everyone's got opinions, and a lot of people in your life, they want to help you. So they might be offering ideas and suggestions, or coming over and like, let me take you out, let me get your mind off of it, and things like that, that are other people are trying to help, and maybe it's really just distracting you from processing all your stuff. So I think the boundaries in those beginning stages can be really important, to give yourself the space you need to process whatever is coming up. And then I think, when you get further along in your process and you've rebuilt your identity, um, now it's time for like a boundaries reboot, because now you need to set boundaries for the new person you are. And they're likely very different from where they were when you started and where they were before your transition.
Mm.
And now it's about, just deciding, you in this new identity, what's okay with you and what's not okay with you, and what, whether it's people or places or activities or environments, what supports you
Yeah.
and what doesn't, and recognizing that, and setting those boundaries and honoring them as a way to honor yourself, and so you can just stay in your power, in your confidence, in your just self-love.
Yeah. So you can stay in that kind of, yeah, the bubble of this new identity that you've created. But
Right.
I guess that's a huge part of the work is that you have to say goodbye to certain things. Like when you create these new boundaries, you might have to let go of certain relationships or certain, maybe even a workplace or, you know, all kinds of different foods. I know.
Sure. Yeah.
Or, whatever it is, how you deal with things will have to change. I mean, there's a lot that you have to maybe give up. And I guess it's how do you shift the focus from what am I giving up to what am I gaining? And I guess that's part of the process too. But like you said, I guess it's about feeling the emotion and allowing that and feeling sad about the things you're letting go of, but then embracing, well, actually, this is what I'm moving towards. And I think sometimes we focus too much on what we're losing and not what we're gaining. That could be part of it too. Hmm.
Yeah, for sure. And that's all about perception. And like you said, sometimes we look at it as, oh, we're giving this up. And if we just look at it from a different lens, and, well, this was part of my life before, and I appreciate it. I'm glad it was there. It served its purpose. And now this is what I want to be a part of my life. And like you said, what are you gaining? So
Mhm.
it's embracing the new things and the new ideas and your new boundaries. And it doesn't mean um, giving up. It just means moving down another path on your journey.
Yeah. When you were talking there, I was just thinking, what a good opportunity to have some sort of ceremony between at that transition point, right? Where you're like, I'm having a bit of a funeral for my like old self and the old part of me that I'm letting go, and that's okay to honor that, and then to celebrate the new life that has is coming around. So, yeah, you could have some sort of ceremony for that. I think that could be interesting and maybe
Yeah, I love
helpful.
that idea. And
Yeah.
you're right, it's about honoring. It's just like anytime
Yeah.
there's a loss, we honor what was lost. And it's the same idea.
Yeah. It
We're
is.
we're honoring it and the part that it played in our life.
Yeah, because it did serve the purpose for
Hmm.
what it was there for, right? And
Yep.
I know going with women on the journey through menopause, but weight loss and that too, it's about, that self served a purpose. Her habits served a purpose. She helped you get to where you are now, and now you realize you don't need some of that anymore, and you can let it go, and you can shed it, and you can gain some new tools and move forward with that. But it's so good. And so good too for, I think, like as we go through menopause, because yes, this is a huge gate, a huge transition where we are saying goodbye perhaps to our former body, our former selves even, um, and embracing something new and accepting that things are changing, but that it can actually be a positive experience, and it doesn't have to be a negative experience or all
Right.
negative, right?
Yeah, it's all about, how you frame it.
Yeah. Oh, I love all of this. I love this whole idea. So do you have an example of a client you've worked with and how you got her through a particular transition so that we can just understand your process a little bit?
So, well, I can talk about one that was a client going through divorce and um, what so how it started was she came to me and said, I said, what do you want to work on? She said, I'm moving toward divorce. And the first thing I started with was, well, you're not moving toward divorce, you're just moving through it. So now let's look at what you want to move toward. And it was this, even that is just a shift in perception. She was like, oh, right, okay. And then it was being able to look at what was on the other side, because this is just a part of your journey. And so some of the things we worked on were acceptance, acceptance for her ex. There were a lot of challenges and there was a lot of tension. Um, and um, One of the big things that we worked through was acceptance. So accepting that person as they are, because that is part of, another kind of step in the process, which is surrender. So by surrendering the things that we can't control, then we make room for ourselves to grow and move through. So that was another big step, was working on acceptance and accepting this person. And then it's, recognizing what things are in your control. Let's spotlight the things that are in your control. So now you can feel some power, you can feel some sovereignty. Like, I do have these things. I'm not helpless. I'm not um, out of control. Like, I have some things that are mine that I can, and that's a really important part, I think, of surrender. And it
Mm-hmm.
was, letting the attorneys do their job, letting your ex do whatever it is he's going to do and say, like letting them all do what they need to do. And then let's focus on what's yours, what you can control, what you can do for yourself. Um, And that was a big part of it. And self-care, a big,
Mm.
big one is self-care. She had kids, so there was a lot of focus on the kids. So another step was just recognizing where she can put in, where she can make time for herself, even if it's 5 minutes. What can you do that's just for you? Even if you're going into the bathroom for 2 minutes and doing some intentional breathing, like what can we do every day? What can we add in that's really just focusing on you?
Mhm.
So those were some of the things we worked through. And like I said, with every case, it's a little different, but those same things are going to um, those same things are going to come up in every situation. Of course, first it was grief. There was a lot of sadness in the beginning, um, a lot of sadness, a lot of crying, and just it's holding space. I do a lot of just holding space. Everything you feel is okay. I say that a lot. Everything you feel is okay, because some people have never heard that, and that can be
Mm.
really, really supportive. Just to know you can sit here and cry for 5 minutes, and it's okay. There's no
Yeah.
judgment.
There's no
And
wrong
then,
feelings. Yeah.
yeah, and then allowing her to be angry at her ex and
Mhm.
allowing that. What does that feel like? What do you want to say to him? All of that, because all of that is okay too. We learn somewhere along the line that anger is bad, and we're always trying to suppress it or dismiss it. Anger is okay. It's another emotion, and emotions are energy. And when we allow ourselves to feel them, then they can move, and they can move through us and move out of us. But as long as we suppress them and dismiss them, they're going to sit there and be stuck in our body. And
Yeah.
then the problem with that is that they're going to come out sooner or later, and you don't know when, and you don't know how. And it could be lashing out at your kid. It could be lashing out at your partner. It could be lashing out at someone at work. It could be having road rage. I mean, you've no idea when it's going to come out.
Yeah.
So when I can help people to just feel all of it, then they get to decide how the emotions come out. And,
Mm.
that's, I think, really important to understand is when you let yourself feel the emotions, then you're in control. When you let yourself feel the anger and let it come out, then it's not going to come out later. You're not going to snap at your kid later because you already got your anger out. So, it's a lot of holding space. um,
Yeah.
and what else? Feeling, yes, feel everything. Feel everything. That's like the first thing. Um, vulnerability. Okay, vulnerability is a big topic. It's a tough topic. I, for one, probably spent most of my life being terrified to be vulnerable.
Mhm.
Um, because we, it's something else that we learn at some point that vulnerability is weakness. And really, it's quite the opposite. Like, vulnerability fosters strength. And being a coach and holding space for clients, it's giving them a space where they can be completely vulnerable. And if that's the only place where they're vulnerable, then so be it. Um, but the more they practice vulnerability, the more they can be in other places in their life. And what is important to realize about, like I said, vulnerability fosters strength. And when you think about it, like I imagine, um, like carrying a lot of weight. We're always carrying so much stuff, right? So, you know, I picture like I'm carrying, I don't know, like a 50-pound sack on my back, and then maybe 20 pounds on each arm, 30 pounds on each leg. And if I'm walking along and you come by and say, "Oh, hey, Trish, can you hold my water bottle?" I'd be like, "No, I can't hold your freaking water bottle. Look at this. Look what I have, And that's sort of a metaphor for how, I mean, I'm sure there have been times in your life where you think, if one more person asks me for something, I'm going to lose it. Or if one more
Mhm.
thing happens, I'm going to fall apart. Like, I cannot handle one more thing. And that's where this image for me comes up of with all the weights. Now, when you're vulnerable, you put down one of the weights. So now I put down one of the weights, and now if you said, "Hey, can you hold my water bottle?" I'd say, "Oh yeah, sure," because I have a free hand. Like I can hold that now. So
Yeah.
the more we're vulnerable, the more we're releasing these weights, the more
Mhm.
we can, that means the more we can hold for ourselves and the more we can hold for others if we choose.
Yeah.
But as long as we're holding everything so tightly, which so many of us do, we hold it all in, we carry everything. Really, that's what's making us weaker because now we have no capacity to hold ourselves or to hold the people around us. Um, and when we're vulnerable, so this is leading into another point that I wanted to bring up is support. So there's like three big things that I think are important with transition: feeling, allowing yourself to feel, which we talked about, vulnerability, and then support.
Mm. Mm.
We humans are wired for connection. Like we are built for this. Support is normal. It's in us to need this, and we're not meant to do everything on our own. When we try to, that's when we get really stressed out and
Yeah.
overwhelmed. Um, and we heal in community. There's strength in community. When we're in a community that is healthy, we are lifted up. We are connected. Um, and this is just um, it's like expanding your strength, you know? So when we're vulnerable, that's when we can open ourselves up for connection. And I'm sure there's been a time when you've heard someone say something, share something, and then you're like, oh my gosh, me too, I didn't, or if you've said something and someone else is like, oh my gosh, me too. I thought it was just me.
Yeah.
But you don't, and then there's instant connection. But that connection doesn't happen until we let ourselves be vulnerable.
Mhm.
And you talked about it when you started talking about your divorce, more people were like, oh, me too. Can we talk about that? Can I ask you questions? Like,
Yeah.
and that's how we connect, is when we start letting our walls down and we open ourselves up for connection. When we open ourselves up for connection, that's when we can start to build community.
Yeah.
And in
So good.
community, we're lifting each other up. And this is a support is so important in transition. And
Yeah.
yeah, and you have to talk about it. You have to say it. You have to say it. And that's one of the hardest things, is to actually
Yeah.
tell people what you're feeling. But guaranteed, guaranteed, you are not the only one. I promise you, you are not the only one. And you will find that out as soon as you say it. As soon as you say what you're feeling, you will find out you are not the only one.
That's so, so true. So true. So much of what you said um, resonated with me. And I mean, that support piece, I mean, probably for you too, it's a big reason I'm a coach, is because I want to support women through things that I've been through myself, like you too. And why I started this podcast was to provide support, because it's vulnerable to talk about yourself, to talk about what you're going through, but there is a lot of strength in that, knowing that you are not alone. So when you put it out there, and like I did learn during my divorce, when I put it out there, I know there's other people that are going to say, me too.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I'm going through something too. And it sounds very similar. And I'm so glad somebody's talking about it. And you create this instant connection with people, right? So, so important. And yet so hard because it goes against what we're taught. And especially, I don't know if it's a Western world kind of thing, to be very independent, and we value independence and we value strength and pushing through and doing it yourself and being this person. It's just not realistic. And in fact, it's not strong in the end, right? Because you haven't, the hardest thing you'll ever do is open up to somebody. I think There's nothing harder than that is to open
Mm-hmm.
up to somebody. And you provide the space for women to open up, and I do similar.
Mm-hmm.
It's empowering when you do open up and when you do let it out. Like you said, let those bags go. Let the weights go. You don't have to carry these alone. You don't even have to carry them. You can let them down. You can set them down and just feel so much lighter and know that there's other people here to help you out, right?
Yeah,
It's
100%.
so
And I
good.
think it's important. Also, I want to point out that when we are, like I said, when we're vulnerable and we're dropping these bags, these heavy bags, it's not just so we can take on more work. It's also that we
Mhm.
can make space for joy. You
Ah,
know, when we carry so much, we're also not giving ourselves the capacity to carry the good stuff either.
mm,
So when we start releasing this, then we make more space for, what do I want? What am I happy doing? Like, what brings me joy? Then you have more capacity to bring more of that in. So I wanted to just point that out. Like, it's not just about the hard
yes.
stuff. We want to bring in more of the good, carry the good stuff too.
Yeah, to create space for joy because
Yep.
it's true. We crowd it out when we're
Mm-hmm.
weighed down with the negative stuff, right? And we don't have to be weighed down with the negative stuff. We don't have to put it down and then take on more stuff that really isn't ours to carry. But anyways, it's so good. And I think I could talk about this for another few hours, but I'm going to
Me
have
too.
to limit that here.
Yeah.
But I will ask you a question that I ask all my guests, which is what is the best part for you so far of getting older?
So I think there's quite a few, but the one that stands out for me is appreciation. So as I've gotten older, I've come to appreciate more things, and I've also come to appreciate things more, if that makes sense.
Mm,
So,
yeah.
um, yeah, I can appreciate more deeply. And, like, there's a full moon, and I catch it. I run outside, and then I get the kids. I'm like, come out and look at
Mm,
this, and just let's just stand here for a few minutes and stare at the moon. Just simple things like that I think I used to take for granted, and I don't now. So just appreciating things in my world and my personal world and just the universal world.
mm, that's so good. I don't know if anybody's ever said that before, so I really like that. And I can totally feel that too for
Mm,
myself, how the small things have become so much more important and I recognize them more, I see them more, I'm more aware. And yeah, I love that. So thanks for sharing that
mhm.
with everyone because I'm sure it's going to resonate as so much of what you've said here today will, I know. So if the women in my audience would like to get in touch with you or learn more about you, how could they do that?
Sure, you can stop by my website, which is dragonpathcoaching.com. You can connect with me there. And also on there, you'll find, if you're interested, I just started a support circle for women going through transitions. It's free,
Mm,
it's on Zoom every other Thursday. It's called the Emerging Women Circle. If you go to my website, there you can click on support circle and then get on the list. And it's for support, it's building community. It's just, giving women more safe spaces where they can be vulnerable. So
mm.
if that resonates, if you want to pop in and check it out, please do. Um, Also, my podcast, which you mentioned, is the Human Show. Apple, Spotify, Google, YouTube. All the
So
places. So
good.
yeah,
That's fantastic. So I will include all of that in my show notes,
okay.
and I have links to all of that. So I'll share them there. And I just want to really thank you for being here today. I really appreciate you and having this conversation, connecting with you because there's a lot of similarity there. I feel a real connection. So it's so good to have had this conversation, because I know it's not just us, it's everyone. This will resonate with so many. So thanks again, Trish, and keep in touch.
Thanks so much, Debbie. I appreciate being here.
Thank you.